More on the security threats from the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Congressman Michael McCaul. He's in Moscow this morning. Congressman, thank you for joining us. You saw President Putin confident he's got the situation under control. Do you share that confidence?
Well, listen, the President Putin's taking this very seriously. About 100,000 security officials have gone down to Sochi, including military forces, special forces. So I think he's taking all the precautions. This ring of steel that you heard him talk about is to secure the perimeter. That is the airport, the railroad to the mountain, and to Sochi. What I'm most concerned about is the proximity to the terrorists. You heard Brian Ross talk about the two suicide bombers that are associated with Umarov, who is sort of like the bin Laden of the Caucasus, if you will. And remember, the Boston bombers came out of this Dagestan Chechen rebel area. So I think the threats are real. The Umarov basically called for attacks on the Olympics. I think you're going to see attempts to do that. I think it's more likely that the attacks will probably happen outside of the perimeter, more soft targets, transportation modes, if you will. I'm meeting with the command and control of operations down there in Sochi, leaving tomorrow to assess the situation. We have 15,000 Americans traveling to Sochi for the Olympics, and I want to do everything I can to make sure it's a safe and successful Olympic.
Do you think you and other U.S. officials can convince the Russians to accept more assistance from the United States?
Well, you know, Diplomatic Security Corps says the cooperation's good. We have 24 FBI agents. But quite frankly, George, it could be a lot better. And that's one thing I want to press while I'm over here. I know Secretary Hagel has offered military assistance as well. You mentioned evacuation plans. I'm very concerned that if something does happen, what is the evacuation plan and emergency response plan that would take place? Again, you're talking about in this Ansar al-Sunna, the group that these two suicide bombers claim to be taking credit for is an al-Qaeda faction, and it's happening in the northern Caucasus, in Russia, in fact, outside of there in Volgograd, which is formerly Stalingrad, at a train station. Very similar to what we saw in Boston with the backpacks and blowing up things. And so all the briefings I've received from the intelligence community to the FBI and others indicate that there are serious concerns and that we need to do a lot to step up security. I do believe Putin is doing a lot of that. These are the largest security operations for any Olympic Games in the history of the Olympics.
If one of your constituents came to you and said, hey, I want to go watch the Olympics in Sochi, would you tell them to go?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I have concerns. I know when I get back from this trip, I'll have better opinions on that. But I know the State Department has issued a travel warning. That's something to take seriously. I have constituents in my district that are participants in the Olympics. But I think we have to be optimistic that we can go forward with the Olympics successfully. I would like to wager a bet that the U.S. team is going to get more medals than the Russians as I sit here in Russia. But I can tell you that as a Homeland Security chairman and the threats that I see, I am concerned.
You heard President Putin say that Edward Snowden can stay in Russia as long as he wants. I want to get you to respond to something from your colleague, Chairman Mike Rogers of the House Intelligence Committee, said just being released this morning. He says that there's reason to believe that Snowden had the cooperation of Russian security services. I believe there's a reason he ended up in the hands and the loving arms of an FSB agent in Moscow. He says, I don't think that's a coincidence. Do you agree?
Hey, listen, I don't think Mr. Snowden woke up one day and had the wherewithal to do this all by himself. I think he was helped by others.
The Russians?
You know, to say definitively, I can't answer that. But I personally believe that he was cultivated by a foreign power to do what he did. And I would submit again that he's not a hero by any stretch. He's a traitor. He lives not very far down the street from where I am right now, enjoying probably less freedoms today here in Russia than he had in the United States of America.
That's a pretty serious charge, sir. Which foreign power do you believe cultivated Edward Snowden?
Again, I can't give a definitive statement on that. But I think given all the evidence I know Mike Rogers has access to, that I've seen that I don't think he was acting alone.
Let's talk about President Obama's NSA reforms, the National Security Agency reforms he announced on Friday. I know you attended the president's speech on Friday. You support the programs, think they've done good for the United States. Any objections to what the president proposed?
Well, listen, I think what he did was, for the first time, explain these programs and defend them. I think metadata, most significantly, will not be dismantled, but rather will be put in the hands of an outside third party. I think what gave most Americans heartburn was that this data was being stored under the NSA and warehoused under the government and this administration, who, quite frankly, has some trust issues. So I think he's moving in the right direction. I will say one of the other problems, George, is oversight. I have a bill that I just introduced with Adam Schiff, who's on the Intelligence Committee, to provide the Government Accountability Office, the investigative arm of the Congress, oversight and review authority of these programs. They've never been allowed access to these NSA programs. Why is that important? Because members of Congress are pretty much in the dark on these programs. This will allow these programs and a review of them to come more to light, if you will, and be more transparent, so that the policymaker will have the information necessary to review them and make the right judgment call. I think right now the oversight is very marginal at best. And I think this bill will go a long ways to shining a light on these programs so members can have a better informed, better decision to make.
So are you confident then the president will be able to come up with a way to house this data outside of the government? It's going to be very difficult, and that's why he's had to put it off for 60 days and have the Attorney General look at it.
Well, yeah, George, you're exactly right. When I would listen to the speech, I thought to myself, when I was doing these types of warrants, we went through the private phone carriers. We know that the private phone carriers don't want to handle this now. So I think that's going to be a real issue in terms of who has the capability, other than NSA, to handle this information, and particularly given the fact that the phone carriers don't want this. So I think the Attorney General is going to have a very difficult decision to make here. He's going to report to the Congress in 60 days, and we will be reviewing that decision. But I think it's very difficult to decide who has the capability to store and use this data.
Congressman McCaul, thanks very much for your time today.